I appreciate you all being here tonight. I'm Mike Ward with Ward on Wine and with Major Brands. And this is going to be a fun presentation for a great cause and a charity that's just so meaningful and I have a personal connection with. And so I hope you all enjoy the presentation. I hope you're all enjoying some wine. And I think it's going to be a fun class tonight and a chance for everybody to get to know wine a little bit more. My intention is always to help people understand the basics of wine, how to enjoy your wine a little bit better. We're going to be talking about grape varieties, a little bit about how wine is made, and we're going to talk about food pairing. We're going to talk about the difference between whites and red wines. We're going to talk about rosés. It's going to be a fun wine conversation, but we were here for the 2020 virtual Rock and Heel World Pediatric Project. So that's what this event is all about. And it's so meaningful and it's so important for us to show support and make a donation for this extremely worthy cause. I mean, 9 out of 10 children in the world don't have access to basic surgical care, something that, we living in the community here takes for granted, but so needed by so many kids. They don't have access to the expertise and the complex treatment they need to live the fullest and productive life. And World Pediatric Project closes these surgical gaps as a global network linking that worldwide pediatric surgical, diagnostic, and preventative resources to heal those critically ill children and give them their life back. And now this is done in Central America and in the Eastern Caribbean, where those kids need it so much. The World Pediatric Project sends over 50 surgical and diagnostic teams to Central America and the Caribbean every year, helping those thousands of kids, plus bringing over 100 children back to the U.S. for their complex surgical treatment, where they can really get the treatment that they need from the specialists who provide it for them. In order to help accomplish this, you all have to be a part of it. Specifically, we need your help today. We want to assist 10 children in their proprietary list who need some treatment. Those 10 children are waiting to travel right here back to St. Louis, and they will get life-changing care. So we have a goal of $100,000 and the difference between a lifetime for these children and their families. So please help us with donations, and we'll talk a little bit more about this worthy cause. As I said, personal to me, my future daughter-in-law is a pediatric respiratory therapist and spent some time this past year in Central America. First time she had ever gone. And we were getting pictures back from her, and she it just changed her life to be able to go down there and help children out. And we were so appreciative of her, and she's such a fantastic hero. So very personal for me. But let's talk about wine a little bit. We're going to start with basic types of wine. Everybody knows wine. Everybody's heard of wine. Everybody, hopefully, enjoys and drinks wine. But what types of wine are there in the world? Well, it starts with these 3 basic types. Still wine, wine without bubbles. And to be honest, that's the wine that we consume the most. Our regular basics, Cabernets and our Pinot Grigios and Merlots and Pinot Noirs and all the basic types of wines that we enjoy. Sparkling wine is just wine with bubbles. Now, sparkling wine starts out as a still wine, and then at some point in the production method, the person making that wine does something to it to insert the bubbles in there through a secondary fermentation. We're not going to really be talking about fortified wine tonight, but ports, sherries, wines like Madeira, Marsala. These are wines that have had brandy added to them in the production process and then have a little higher alcohol, and that wine's been fortified. So that conversation is for another day, though, about fortified wines. I do like to go on from here and talk a little bit about what's in your glass of wine. And I'm going to highlight a couple of key components because actually understanding what's in that wine kind of helps you enjoy it better, learn how to manage it better, learn how to pair it with food correctly. And so I always like to kind of point out a couple of things. One of them is alcohol. Wine has alcohol in it. Thankfully, it's ethanol, and ethanol in moderate doses it won't kill us. I'll put it that way. It is something that the human body can process. So ethanol is very important. And whether you're making beer or wine or spirits, ethanol is the alcohol that you're looking for. So important to have acidity in wine. You want to know why your wine goes well with pasta, with pizza, with seafood. It's the acidity. So typically wines are balanced between alcohol and acidity. When the wine is out of balance and doesn't taste right, that means there's too much acidity or too much alcohol. And so we need a balance there. And that's what every winemaker is trying to accomplish from their producing their wine. Yes, there's a little bit of sugar, even in the driest wines. There could be a slight bit of sugar. And we'll talk later today about how people make sweet wines in the world and kind of what the difference is between a dry wine and a dessert wine. And, we'll discuss that as well. Another key component is the phenolic component of wine. This would be the color component as well as something called tannins. And tannins are on the skins of the red grapes, like pictured here, and an important component because they have the health benefits of wine. So tannins have resveratrol, they have antioxidants. And so again, in moderate doses, wine can have a proven, controversial, but proven health benefit for wine. So, tannins are important as well. I like this slide, and I'm not going to go into great detail here about the types of acids and sugar, but I love this inside of this grape. And I'm going to stop here for just a minute because people accuse me of being a wine geek, which I am, but I love to think about how grapes are this perfect vehicle for making wine. They've got everything that you need inside of these grapes to successfully make a bottle or glass of wine. So you have juice. Inside of the grape, the water, sugar, acids coming from inside of the grape. The skins give us the color component and the tannins and other flavors. There's also yeast around the grapes and in the vineyards and the winery to help wines during the production method. The stalk and the seeds, we try to avoid those because those have excessive bitter tannins, bitter oils. So typically winemakers, when they're making wine, want that juice that sits right inside of the skin of the grape. That's the best juice for making wine. Now, grapes for wine are not good table grapes. They don't really taste good. Those seeds, like I said, are very bitter. You really shouldn't bite them or chew them. You got to spit them out. So table grapes are a lot different and a lot better for wine. I mentioned acidity, which is so important, and tartaric acid is only found in grapes and provides a lot of that balance of acidity for wine. So that's another important component. There's a couple of other things before we move on just to discuss. One of them from this slide is sulfites. And I'd also don't want to forget to say for any of you that want this presentation, I am more than happy to provide it for you. And at the end, I'll give you my contact information, an email. So I'm happy to just send it to you if you want to be a wine geek like me and take a look at what wine's all about. So I did want to just kind of mention sulfites from this slide. The confusing kind of myth about sulfites. Typically they are in wine at 1 part per 10 million, so a very small amount of sulfites. Sometimes they're added to wine as a preservative. But they are naturally occurring during fermentation and so will be created in some capacity in all wines. And people can have a allergy to sulfites, and it can affect them in a very negative way. But sulfites are there, they're a preservative, they're helpful, but they can also kind of go against people sometimes in some cases. So now that we know what's in our wine, now that we know some of the components of wine, we know some of the basics of alcohol and acid and sulfites and tannins, let's talk about the place where grapes are grown, because that matters a lot as well. Grapes can't just grow anywhere. They like to grow in places that are a little bit inhospitable for other agricultural types of crops. And what I mean is any place where you've got fertile soil, where you can grow soybeans and corn and things like that, is not going to be good for grapes. We need those grapevines stressed. We need them in rocky soil. We need them in perfect climates. Grapes like to grow in places like Northern California and Washington State, and Oregon, and France, and Italy, and Australia, and New Zealand, and some of those other places where grapes grow quite successfully, and Missouri. But they like certain conditions. Grapevines like to grow in places where it doesn't rain during the growing season, where if the place that they're in gets rain, all that rain happens in the winter. And in the summer, when they're trying to grow grapes and make grape clusters, they don't get any rain. So that's hard to find, but if we can find those places, that's typically where we're going to plant those vineyards, like in the picture here of Napa Valley. So climate and weather is so important. We need sunlight. We need sunshine during the day, and then we need it to cool down at night. We don't really get that in Missouri, but in some places we get nice cool evenings and we get all this sunshine during the day, where we're going to get some photosynthesis, and that's going to produce some sugar that's going to make its way into our grapes and provide some sugar there. We need a little bit of water, but not too much. We need a little bit of wind, some fog and humidity. We need sometimes a little bit, not too much. And we need good rocky soil that comes in many different shapes and sizes, but that's what we need to grow grapes. And typically we find these growing areas between 30 and 50 degrees latitude in both hemispheres that kind of help us out a lot. Oh, here's a map of what I'm talking about. So these shaded lines around the globe illustrate some of the best places to grow grapes. It includes Europe, and places like China, which we don't think of for wine, but it is an emerging market for wine, in Japan, and of course most of the United States it falls into that same area. And then Chile and Argentina, parts of South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand all fall into that zone. It's hard to grow grapes near the equator. It's a little too tropical. You know, there's other things that we can grow there. Grapes for wine, yeah, we could. Maybe make some locally consumed wine. And we don't grow a lot of grapes in northern Canada and Greenland and Alaska. But, you know, we have our places where grapes grow very, very well. So now that we have identified our terroir, so to speak, I hate to use that, that's a nice French word, that's everything that we just talked about, and we've looked at our wine component, let's go on next to identify some white grapes. We're going to start with white wine and white grapes. And we've picked out some kind of general grapes that we're all used to, and we've identified some characteristics of those grapes that'll tell us a little bit more about those particular wines. These are all a species of grape called vinifera, and vinifera species makes some of the best wine grapes in the world. It's also hard to grow. It only grows in certain locations, and it's very susceptible to diseases. There are other species of grapes and hybrid grapes as well, but tonight we're going to concentrate on those well-known vinifera grape varieties. And what's significant about it is if you take cuttings of these vines from where they originally come from and then plant them in other parts of the world, the wine's going to taste different. So if we take a Chardonnay from Sonoma and from Burgundy and from South America and Australia and kind of line them up and taste them all, yeah, we're going to find some similarities, but we're also going to see some vast differences. So Chardonnay is a wonderful grape variety. It can be barrel aged, which is unique for a white wine. It can be buttery. It can have that nice butterscotch and toast type of flavor and aroma to it, but can also have nice green apple that comes directly from the acidity and make a very well-rounded, full-flavored food wine. Next is the grape Chenin Blanc that comes from the Loire region of France. And Chenin Blanc is one of those grape varieties that can be anything you want it to be. And I will include Riesling in this as well. They have natural high acidity. They can be really, really sweet wines. They can be really, really dry wines. They can be sparkling wines. They can do anything that you want them to do. Chardonnay doesn't really make a good sweet wine, but Chenin Blanc and Riesling can, of course. And there's only one thing they can't do, and that's be a red wine. Anything else you want from those grapes, they're going to supply it. Sauvignon Blanc is next. So Sauvignon Blanc comes from Bordeaux in France. It's grown in the Loire region of France. And of course, when we think of Sauvignon Blanc, we might think of New Zealand. When brought to New Zealand, it really took off in that little region of Marlborough, which sits at the northern part of the South Island. And it just expresses all this gooseberry and grapefruit and fruity aromas that you don't find in Sauvignon Blanc, typically from France. Grows really well in Northern California as well. Semillon is an interesting grape from France. Doesn't really have a lot of acidity to it, so it's a better blending grape. You want to take Semillon and blend it with something that's got a little bit more acidity to it, but it does really well in Australia, that's for sure. A few other white grape varieties to touch on before we get into white wine making. Gewürztraminer. Maybe some of you have heard of Gewürztraminer, maybe others haven't. Sounds very German, doesn't it? Gewürztraminer. It's an Italian grape, comes from northern Italy in the Trentino Alto Adige region, and it's a variation of the Traminer grape variety, Gewürz part meaning spicy. Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris are mutations of Pinot Noir. All three the same grape, but Pinot Noir has a red skin to it, and Pinot Blanc has a green skin, and Pinot Grigio actually has kind of a pinkish colored, gray colored skin. But they all make wonderful wines, and they're all from the Burgundy region of France. Viognier is a little bit different. It comes from the northern Rhone region of France. It has some characteristics similar to Chardonnay, but is also totally different. And a little hidden fact about Viognier, grows really well in certain parts of Missouri, and it's hard to grow vinifera vines here in Missouri. Let's just take a look very briefly at, I love this chart because it kind of illustrates how white wine and red wines are made and how rosés are made. Now there's some similarities and there's some vast differences as well. And so just as a summary for white wine making, we don't need the skins because we're making a white wine. The juice is clear, the grape skins are green, we don't need them. So we can pick those grapes and put them directly into a press, lightly, gently press the grapes. That's going to separate the juice from the skins. That juice in turn is going to go into a tank. We're going to add some yeast. We're going to make our wine. We can choose to barrel it or maybe not. And then it's going to go into bottling from there. For red wines, we need the skins. The juice inside those grapes is clear. So we're going to bypass the press and we're going to take the skins and the juice and put it directly into a tank. Now, if we're making a rosé, we're going to give it a short period of time to pull some color from the skins, and then we're going to separate that juice from the skins and it's pink, and we'll further let the wine ferment from there. But if we're going to make a red wine, then we're going to keep the skins and the juice together, and we're going to sort of allow them to spend some time together making a wine, and then later in the process, we'll put them in the press and then a barrel. And I've got another slide in a minute to kind of illustrate for red wine making how that works. Let's talk about those red grapes. So starting with Cabernet Sauvignon, the king of grapes, sort of that big, bold, spicy wine. Cabernet comes from Bordeaux region of France, made on the left bank of Bordeaux. Some of the classic, expensive wines of the world come from Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a very versatile grape, and it's one of those grapes that I like to think it always tastes good. You know, you can plant it in California. You can plant it in South America, Australia. You can plant it even in China. There's more vineyard acreage of Cabernet in China than there is in France today. And it comes out well, comes out really nice. It's a big, bold grape. Here's your one thing to think about with Cabernet for you, that Cabernet lovers. It needs some air. So please, you know, when you open that bottle of Cab, let's decant it. Let's let some air get to it. You know, let's let it breathe a little bit. You are going to enjoy that wine so much better after about an hour of air contact if you have that kind of time. And Cabernets can age a little bit longer too. They don't have to, but they can. And they're going to express all kinds of dark chocolate, bell pepper, vanilla from the barrel. The vanilla actually comes from the barrel, some coffee, caramel, cigar box. Cabs are great with steak, beef, that richness of the meat, and going with the richness of the Cabernet. Merlot, everybody kind of bashes Merlot, but Merlot's a pretty good grape variety. And Merlot likes to be blended with Cabernet. You can certainly drink Merlot by itself. But the little secret of the wine industry is that most people, when they buy a Cabernet, take it home and drink it, and the label says Cabernet, there's a little bit of Merlot in that wine as well, because Merlot has softer tannins. And Merlot has blueberries, plums, and black cherries. And it's going to soften up that Cabernet a little bit. It's going to add some blue fruit component to it. So Merlot is a nice food wine as well, very versatile. Now, these two grapes love to be blended together. Pinot Noir, our next grape, does not like to be in a blend. Pinot Noir, wonderful grape variety, one of our lightest grape varieties. It likes to be the star of the show, and when you put it in a blend, it's going to sit behind the other grapes and kind of hide away and do what it wants to do. So Pinot Noirs tend to be single varietal wines that you find by themselves. Of course, Pinot Noir is from Burgundy, and it is some of the best Burgundy in the world, some of the best wine in the world coming from Burgundy. It also grows well in places like Oregon and the Willamette Valley, coastal parts of California, and a few other places in the world like New Zealand, and it pops up into some other cool climate areas. It has a relatively thin skin to it. It is a difficult grape to grow and to ripen. But when done right, it can have beautiful cherry, raspberry, strawberry, and sometimes a little bit of earthiness to it. The grape Syrah from France is also the grape Shiraz from Australia. They're the same grape variety. It got a different name when it moved to Australia, but it's the same exact grape. It tastes completely different though. And Syrah is a wonderful blending grape as well, and it has lots of tannins to it. It's big and bold. It also needs some time to open up and breathe after you open that bottle, but can give you all these nice kind of food-friendly, spicy characteristics as well. Just don't forget the Shiraz, same exact grape. And then let's highlight a few other grapes here on this page. We have some grapes here on this slide that we don't see commonly all over the world, or certainly don't see here in Missouri or even in California. We've got some Italian and French grapes here, like Barbera, which comes from the Piedmont region of Italy and is kind of a classic high acid, fruit forward, everyday kind of food wine in that region. Gamay is a grape that comes from the Beaujolais region of France, just south of Burgundy. makes for a kind of a fruit-forward type of wine. You may remember Gamay sometimes if we talk about a wine called Beaujolais Nouveau, which is 100% Gamay. It comes out once a year in November, and it's a very short-aged wine. Sangiovese is the grape of Chianti, usually showing up as a blend, sometimes the dominant grape variety in Chianti. In other wines in Tuscany, it's blended together with Cabernet and Merlot even. Wonderful high-acid grape. Perfect grape for a blend, because you can take Sangiovese and blend it with Cabernet and Merlot and boost that acidity, and all of a sudden you got this awesome food wine. So Chianti is Sangiovese, and Sangiovese has a bunch of other names all around Tuscany as well. Nebbiolo. The name Nebbiolo means the fog. This grape grows in Piedmont as well. It is a super tannic buster, big, powerful wine that needs to age for a long time and gives you all these kind of rose, violet, cedar, blackberry notes. But don't, I mean, I hate to say this, but don't even touch it until it's 10 years old. And then it'll be drinkable. But it is truly a wonderful grape variety. Tempranillo is the grape of Spain. Just like Sangiovese is the grape of Tuscany, Tempranillo is the grape of Spain. You find it in wines like from Rioja and Ribera del Duero and several other parts of Spain. It's a fantastic grape variety. It can do anything you want it to do. It's got good acidity. It's got spice. It's a good food wine. It's a good blending grape. It can do so many different things. It has a bunch of different names all throughout Spain, so you can see it in all kinds of different forms and different types of wines. You can put it into American oak, which is unusual for wines because most wines go into French oak, and Tempranillo can still be your friend when you're putting it in American oak. And then last grape on this list is Zinfandel. Zinfandel, a truly American grape, is not from here, of course, but it came to the U.S. From Eastern Europe in and around the 1820s. Made its way out to California. Along the way, it got misnamed. It's not called Zinfandel where it's originally from. And it's one of those few grapes that can have a very old vine. It can grow to be 100 to 120 years old. Most grapes can't do that. Most grapes have a lifespan of about 30 years or so, 30, maybe 50 years. Zinfandel could be really old. Spicy, lots of good acidity. In Italy, when they grow it in Italy, they call it Primitivo, but it's originally from the country of Croatia, and in Croatia they call it Tribadrag, which is not a very fun name, but a good Croatian name. I like Zinfandel for it. So, one of the things to think about with red wine is, as I mentioned, inside of that red grape, the juice inside of there is clear. So in order to make a red wine, we need the skins and we need the juice. We need that phenolic component and that phenolic contact with the wine. So that's definitely something to think about that's going to lead to the production of the wine. So that's an important component with red wine making, is having that those skins there in contact with the wine. Let me just talk about that for just a second, not to get too geeky or sciencey for all of you, but just to make an idea so people kind of know. You got these two different tanks here on this illustration. This is from our friends at Wine Folly, which is a great resource for maps and for education, a great book if you're ever looking for a wine book. Love the Wine Folly people. They're so down to earth. But in order to get the color into the wine, winemakers have a couple of choices, because the CO2 in that fermenting wine is going to push those skins to the top of the tank. So we can either use the method on the right, which is to take a device, cut a hole in the skins, and physically push the skins down to the bottom of the tank. It's very less invasive, and it really takes care of the wine the right way, but it's very labor intensive. The other way to make a red wine is the illustration on the left, and that is we hook a hose to that tank and we pump the wine up and over the top, and then we spread the wine out over the skins continuously. It's just two ways of making red wine successfully during the fermentation process. One of them is more efficient, less labor intensive, easier to do, less expensive to do, and the other, pumping or punching down, is a little less invasive for the wine. This is usually, people ask me in classes a lot, what's the difference in price points in wine? Well, a lot of it can depend on the grapes and the land and what you're trying to make, but some of it is the production as well. And it's a lot more expensive to punch down the wine than it is to pump over the wine. So just an idea to think about. So basically, when you're making white wines versus making red wines, white wines start with the grapes coming to the winery. They go immediately into the press. They come from the press with just the juice into fermentation, and then they go through some kind of aging and bottling. For red wines, they come into the winery. They go directly to fermentation. Then they go to the press to separate the skins and the juice. We do aging, we do bottling, and we're ready to go. All right, so now we have made our wine, and we're ready to move on to a couple of other aspects of it. But wait, before we go on, let me talk about rosés, which are some of the hottest category of wine today. And how are rosés made? Well, we start with good red grapes, and we don't stomp them. I love this picture that I found, but we typically don't stomp grapes anymore. Not the only place where you find this done is in Portugal for port production. But we might, do a light de-stemming on the grapes. And then we send them to the press, and we allow those red grapes and the juice to sit in the press for a few hours, sometimes better part of a day. And eventually that wine's going to start to take on some color from the skins. Once that color turns pink, now we're going to press it. We're going to pump that wine into a tank, and as you can see, it's a pink wine. And now we're ready to allow it to ferment, hopefully to a dry wine, because I personally prefer the dry rosés. But rosé is basically a wine with minimal skin contact. So it sits right in between the red wines and the white wines. You drink it slightly chilled. Biggest mistake people make is possibly chilling it too much. Serve it about 50 degrees, but in a minute here, we're going to get to wine temperatures. I wanted to take a second to talk about sweet wines. So I think people are kind of confused about sweet wines sometimes, and there's a lot of different ways to make sweet wines. There is a difference between dessert wines and lightly sweet wines. So Riesling sometimes Chenin Blanc, a few other wines can be lightly sweet or semi-dry or semi-sweet, and they're great wines with spicy foods. The way they're made is just by simply removing the yeast from the fermentation tank before the fermentation is done. But there's other ways of making actually classic sweet wines in the world. One of them is to have the grape affected by this fungus called noble rot, and it grows on the grapes in certain areas of the world. It's called botrytis. Don't be scared away from it. It is a very, very fantastic thing. It sends little follicles into the grape. The grape drains some of the juice out. It just pierces the skin. Some of that water that comes out of the grape turns into botrytis. And what we're doing is we're concentrating the sugar inside of there. So when we do pick it and press it, we've got this nice concentrated wine that makes kind of a honeyed characteristic, and some of the most age-worthy wines in the world. A couple of other choices we have is late harvested fruit. The longer we leave that fruit out on the vine, the more sugar it picks up, the riper it becomes, and now we got a lot of sugar access to us, so we can make a late harvested wine. We can pick the grapes and bring them back to the winery and dry them. They do this in parts of the world. Let them sit on straw mats or in the rafters of the winery and dry out and become little prunes, little like raisins. Press them and make a wine. Or we can make an ice wine, actually freezing the grapes out on the vine and then going out in November or December and picking those frozen grapes. And a lot of that water content of the grape has now become ice, and we're going to press it and get rid of the ice, and we've got concentrated juice. Ice wines are becoming increasingly hard to make, and you can pretty much only make them in Germany and Canada, maybe a little bit in Austria, but they are fantastic if you've ever tried one. So let's talk a little bit about food pairing and serving temperatures. So I spent many years running restaurants, and so a couple of things I like to do is pair wine and food together. So I help people do that for many years, and then I always kind of ask people to serve wine at the right temperature. So spicy foods pair well with wines that are medium sweet or semi-sweet or off dry. That sweetness of the wine will interact with the spiciness of the food and really kind of cool it off a little bit. So think about like sushi with that little bit of wasabi, and then we're going to add a nice semi-dry Riesling with high acid, going to pair together perfectly. Fatty foods, tannic red wines. I already kind of mentioned Cabernet with that nice elegance and that intensity and those tannins. It's going to match perfectly with that rich food in beef, and they're going to match perfectly together. Salty foods go with wines with high acidity and maybe some tannins, but I like to veer from this a little bit and say try some salty foods with sparkling wines as well, like dry brut style sparkling wines. Nothing better than champagne and potato chips. Nothing, it doesn't have to be fancy, sometimes. Sweet foods are actually hard to pair wine with. Dessert wines sometimes can go with sweet foods. You got to match the sweetness exactly. So semi-dry or semi-sweet wines don't match with sweet foods at all. You got to match or have a higher sweetness in the wine for sweeter foods. Basically, for wine and food pairing, the rule of thumb is drink what you like with what you like to eat. I am not a snob. I will never criticize anyone for drinking whatever they want with the foods that they want. If someone only drinks Pinot Grigio and they want to have Pinot Grigio with a steak, that's fine with me. I would only say that, your only problem with that is that you're not going to be able to taste the wine. The food is going to overpower the wine. So drink what you like. And then for those of you that might want to be developing a palate for food and wine together, that's what I would tell you. If you don't drink red wines at all, but you want to, have those red wines with food, and that's going to help you to develop a palate for wines. I always say, one of the classic wine and food pairings is Chianti, Sangiovese, highly acidic, with tomato sauce. Now, Chianti by itself is not the best cocktail wine. Really good wine, sure, but when you match it with that pasta, the acidity is going to match. Tomatoes are acidic. Sangiovese is acidic. It's just going to come together. Or pizza, anything with tomato sauce. That's how you develop your palate for food, is by matching food and wine together. Serving temperatures, so important. We tend to drink wine too cold. If you're drinking wine at the same temperature as your beer in your refrigerator, it's a little too cold for it, and I would ask you to warm it up just a little bit, especially light wines like Pinot Grigios and Sauvignon Blancs. Once they get about 10 degrees above refrigerator temperature, the flavors, the aromas start to pop from those wines. You start to really, really taste it. Light-bodied wines like Pinot Noir, we're drinking those way too warm. Room temperature is too warm. So if you're going by room temperature for your red wines, that's fine. No criticism from me, but try chilling them a little bit, and they will be that much better. Full-bodied red table wines like Cabernets, they even need a little bit of time in the refrigerator. Drop them in the refrigerator for 10 minutes before you go to the table. So If you are having a big Napa Valley Cabernet and you bought some nice steaks that you're going to grill, here's what I'd ask you to do. Oh, first of all, before you even season the meat and start the grill, first open the wine and take it out of the bottle and put it in a decanter or anything, some type of glass pitcher, and put it somewhere. Don't put it on the windowsill. Doesn't like sunlight. Put it somewhere in a dark place in the house. Then you can prepare the steaks and cook the steaks. Once you pull the steaks off the grill, they have to sit and rest for a few minutes. Now you take your wine and you put it in the refrigerator. 10 minutes later, when those steaks are hitting the table, you got the right temperature on the wine. It is decanted for about an hour. You got the perfect at-home situation for drinking your nice, expensive, or even moderately priced Napa Valley Cabernet. So try it, think about it. Last thing about serving temperatures is outside drinking of wine. Love it to go outside. Love going out on the deck and having a glass of wine. Fantastic. Going to grab that bottle and walk out there with you because you don't want to go back inside every time you want a glass of wine. Even if you're drinking red wines, make sure you got a cooler, you got a wine chiller, you got something out there. The warmer that wine gets, and we know, it can warm up. It can still be hot in the summer at 8 o'clock or so. The warmer that wine gets, you're pretty much just going to taste the alcohol, and you're not going to be enjoying the wine at its best. So remember, temperature is so important. Wine and beer are super delicate. They can be ruined very easily. Store them in the wrong place, store them out in the sun, open the bottle of wine and don't drink it for 5 or 6 days. It's going to be ruined. Little things like that. The wine will oxidize after a couple of days. So if you are taking care of the wine, it will take care of you. Your bottle of vodka, you can do anything to it and you're not going to hurt it. Spirits are stabilized and they are not going to be ruined by their environment. Wine and beer is very, very subject to its environment. One more thing I want to talk to you about is a little bit about tasting wine. So, wine use all your senses when tasting wine, except maybe hearing, unless it's a sparkling wine. Then you can try to listen to it and see what it says. But you use all your senses when you're tasting wine. First, we look at the color of the wine. I teach a lot of sensory evaluation classes, and I teach blind tasting. So your color of your wine can tell you a lot about the wine, its appearance, its grape variety, its region, its vintage. And I would tell you also the way to consume wine correctly is to have a large glass, a relatively large glass. It can be glass or plastic even. It can be anything, but a large glass with a small amount of wine in it. So generally a 10, maybe up 15-ounce glass with just about 2 or 3 ounces of wine in it. The bottom of the glass is reserved for the wine or the liquid, and the rest of the glass is there for the aromas. And so don't fill your glass to the rim. Even if you had a rough day, you don't want to fill your glass to the rim. You want to be able to smell it, right? So when you give it a slight swirl, that bowl of the glass is going to fill up with the aromas. And then when you smell it, they'll all be there waiting for you. Wine can have up to 200 different unique aromas over the life of the wine. That's a lot going on in that wine. So try to smell it, and that you'll appreciate it a little bit better. Taste is next. Your actual sense of taste is very limited. You taste sweet, sour, salty, bitter, savory. What are you going to get in wine? Maybe bitter if it's a red wine. Maybe sweet if it's a semi-sweet wine or something like that. It better not be salty, and it shouldn't be sour. Something's wrong with it. So when you taste wine, you will kind of keep it on your palate for just a few seconds. Maybe even bring some air in, enjoy it, make funny mouth noises, and the air will increase the volatile capacity of the wine. The aromas will start to evaporate, and you'll smell it and taste it at the same time. Each wine has a texture too, has a weight to it. Think of Pinot Grigios as being very light. and Chardonnays and Cabernets as being very full-bodied. You can feel the weight of the wine. That's going to give you a little bit more texture to it. Understanding that is also going to help you to pair wine and food together, knowing what's a light wine and what's a more full-flavored, full-bodied wine. So you try this along the way, and it'll help you enjoy wine better, understand wine better, understand what you like better, which is the most important thing. He asked me, is one wine better than the other? No, one wine is just different than the other. So you'll never hear criticism from me on what kind of wine you're drinking or how much you're spending on it. I just want you to enjoy it at its best. So again, we are here for the Virtual Rock and Heal World Pediatric Project. And what a great organization. And I want to personally thank them for allowing me to spend some time with you here tonight. I hope all of you will make a donation for this super important and worthy cause. And I just want to thank you for being here and listening. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. World Pediatric Project will continue their amazing and passionate work, help as many children as possible. What dedicated people they are to really getting the proper care to kids that really deserve it, and they deserve to live their best lives. People, please know how any amount is appreciated and will help the next child on their list get that care that they need. You can donate. 10 children are waiting. Travel to St. Louis. Bring them into our community where we can give them the life-changing care that they deserve. We want your donation towards that $100,000 that would make that difference to these children and their families who would greatly appreciate your help. So please donate and just really make a difference in the world. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to the presentation, and we appreciate you being here.